Amen. Please be seated. Well, Lent has begun. Ash Wednesday started the season, and we are called into this time of penitence, repentance, reflection, to look at our lives, to do something these 40 days that sets this time apart from the rest of the year. Take something on, give something up, whatever we choose to do. Every year we try to make it a little bit more spiritual, maybe a little bit better, a better Lent. And then when it's over, we rejoice in the resurrection. We arrive at Easter and we celebrate. Lent is over and we have a chance to begin again. We always look to Easter as our new beginning. Things are new, they're fresh. But really the opportunity that God gives us to start over or try things new begins at Lent. Lent can be so much more than a time of penance. This may be hard to believe. When I was in 8th grade, I was on the basketball team. I wasn't very good, but I was tall. I didn't play very much either. But one game, the coach put me in, and I was doing really well. I had all this energy and this height, and I really looked like I knew exactly what I was doing. And I remember at one point I had the ball, and I remember looking around and everybody's cheering, the whole gym. Everybody's cheering and shouting, shoot. And I did. I shot the ball at the basket. Now, it doesn't really matter whether I made the basket. What really matters is that what everybody was really yelling was, don't shoot. Because I was shooting at the wrong basket. And yes, I scored 2 points for the other team. And that's an absolute true story. True story. And so you can only imagine in 8th grade how long it took for me to live that down. This may not sound like a real story of hope, but I promise that it is. It is. Often a mistake like that, something small or maybe something very large, something that we see as a failure, can sometimes turn into a fear. And it can drive us into the wilderness. I can tell you I really didn't want that ball back again. We want to stay away, alone. We go out into our places of solitude, away from other people, for fear that that might happen again. We don't want that to ever happen again. This is exactly at the point in my sermon where I stopped writing. I was typing on Wednesday, and I was going to talk about this first Sunday in Lent, about a time of fear, that's what happens, and we go into the wilderness with this fear, but we go in with God. And as I was writing, it was Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, Valentine's Day, and I had the Olympics on the TV in the background. But then a special report broke in, the news about the shooting at the school in Parkland. And then the news quickly turned to pictures, to scenes of the school, kids walking out with their arms raised, police everywhere. You could see parents pulling up, looking for their children. There was lots of scenes outside of the school. And then later on, it wasn't really a video clip. It was more like a 2 or 3 second clip on the phone that one of the students had taken to send out for help. And it showed them huddling together, all these students in the corner of the classroom. And you could hear the gunfire in the background. And you could see in that little snapshot the absolute petrifying fear in their faces. So I stopped writing. I was overcome by sadness, but also I was overcome with this incredible feeling of helplessness. Here I was, and I thought, I can't feel like I could do anything. So I began to pray. I prayed for safety for these kids, protection, that God would keep them safe, a quick capture for the shooter wherever he was, so that they could get out and get reunited with their families and get out of that building. All sorts of prayers. And then later on, I added something else. I began to pray to God to not allow the fear that I was seeing in those kids' faces, to not allow that fear to become a permanent part of their lives. Fear was so present. There was no hope. I didn't see any hope in any of those pictures, only fear. So every night this week, I've just been praying and praying that these kids will be able to one day see some hope and find the courage that they can walk back into that school. And I don't mean on Monday. I'm talking about in the weeks to come, the months to come, and the years to come, that they can go back in there. And praying to God that there will be a day that what happened to them on Wednesday won't be the first thing they think of when they get up in the morning. Then I return to the gospel and I read the story about Jesus in the wilderness, the temptations from Satan. And I think, okay, well, this is Lent. We're in Lent. We go into that wilderness with Jesus. During these 40 days, we are going into that place with Jesus. And if we're truly going to look at this as a season to deepen our relationship with Christ, we have to find hope in the wilderness. If we don't, then fear just takes over. And hope is in the back seat. And in that back seat is God. And I think, do we really want to live where we allow fear to drive us and hope in God remain in the background? Fear drives us away, not just from others, but also from God. This past Friday, I was talking to a mother, and she said to me, my son, who's a senior in high school right here in Fort Myers, came home and said to her, I don't understand the point of all this. What's the point? What is the point of me going to school, you going to work? What is the point when this stuff happens? And I thought, what a hard conversation to have with a 17-year-old son. So she said, I just talked to him about God, about how bad things happen, but they don't define who we are, and they don't define God's intention for us. When things happen in our world, our country, or right here in the state of Florida, fear is an immediate response, and absolutely fear. Of course, I can't even imagine being in a situation like that. I can't imagine somebody I know being in a situation like that. I can't even fathom our children or our grandchildren having to hide from a shooter in their classroom. It's something that it's hard to imagine. So fear is a response. And the hope that I pray for is that in the midst of all that fear, we can search and somehow find God. We as a community of faith, it's up to us to do that. It is what we are called to do. To see in any sort of terrible scene, to see the face of God. No matter how hard it is, no matter how long we have to search, we have to look around and see the face of God. And if we really look hard, we can find him. You know, in the midst of gunfire, when we hear stories about a teacher that got her whole classroom into a closet and then she stood with them, but she was the one who stood in front of the door, I think that's where God is. Or when we hear about a young girl who protected her best friend by standing in front of her, and in turn she lost her life. I think that's God, because only God can give somebody that kind of courage. A stranger who reaches out, a complete stranger, who reaches out to protect somebody they don't even know, but does it out of complete instinct to help. I say that's where God is. That's where we find God. Jesus went into the wilderness to fulfill his promise to God, his Father, and he wasn't alone. God was with him. It says in the Gospels, the angels ministered to him. Do we not also believe that God will be with us also in our wilderness? We have to ask ourselves over and over and over again, where is God in our wilderness? Where is God in our times of greatest fear? And if we can't find him, then we just keep looking. We keep searching. We find him until we do, and then when we do, we make his presence known. We are part of a strong community of faithful people. We've got to search out God and acknowledge him. If we don't do that, who else is going to? I said at the beginning that basketball story was a story of hope. It's a small, tiny story of hope. Nothing huge, but for an 8th grader who just scored 2 points for the other team, there was hope in this story. Because if you can believe it or not, I actually stayed in the game. The coach kept me in. I don't think there were enough players on the bench. So he kept me in, and I actually got the ball back, and I actually scored 2 points for the right team. And I think that was the end of a very short, well-lived basketball career. So let's enter this wilderness with Jesus. This Lent, in the time of penance when we're looking inward, look for the hope. Look for the face of God. Whatever we choose to give up, whatever we choose to take on, whatever fear we might face, let us find God. And then when we find him, share it. Especially now when so many people need to hear that, when they need to hear the witness to the presence of God. Fear will never win if we acknowledge hope, if we acknowledge that presence, and that no matter the outcome, God will always be there. Facing our fears and finding hope is the way to find God. So may this Lent be not just a time of penance, but a time of hope. Amen.